about, there's so many things we can talk about and delve into, but I'd love to maybe just use this time as an opportunity for you to name what questions you have remaining. Where are the missing pieces for you about the Episcopal Church? I know some of you have been doing some reading, and so I'd love to just take any questions you have or any topic that you would like to introduce, and we will do a little bit of discussion on that. So I'm going to throw it open to you all. What, as you've worshiped in the church, we've talked over the last several weeks, you had a great session with Father Dave in the church. Sorry about last week's cancellation, but what is it that either causes you to scratch your head, or you'd love to know something a little bit more in depth?
I was fixing a pop figure up on top of my desk, but hey, I'll go for it. One of the things I've noticed about what we've talked about is there's a lot of emphasis within the Episcopal Church about the church being unified by how we do church.
Yes.
How does the church handle differing opinions and disputes about theological issues that don't necessarily have to do with the way that we do worship? I mean, how is that dealt with or figured out? Or
well, I think that's sometimes gracefully and sometimes not gracefully. For example, let's go with how we do worship, which you're referring to the old Latin phrase, lex orandi, lex credendi. The law of prayer is the law of belief. In other words, how we pray affects what we believe, and worship is a core piece for us. But the Episcopal Church, as we know, is part of a worldwide family that came out of the Church of England. And the Church of England found itself in the 19th century dealing with some division in theology, because the Church of England was a compromise between a more Catholic and a more Protestant theology. Marshall, you're Methodist by background. Methodism started as a form of Anglicanism. Started in the Church of England with the Wesleys. And so when we talk, so the church has constantly struggled with differences of perspective and emphasis theologically. It became, in the 19th century, there was a segment of the church that moved called the Oxford and Cambridge movements, started at Oxford University. John Henry Newman and Pusey and others, who were the intellectual founders of a movement that initially was theological, that looked back to the medieval church as a source of inspiration, to emphasize the Catholic roots of the church, and particularly the medieval Catholicism over the Protestant or Calvinist influences in the church. And that created a great deal of tension that could break out into some rather, how should I say it, rather distinctive fights. So you would have some who were high church, some who were low church, bishops who were high church, or more Catholic, bishops who were more Protestant. There was also, out of this theological movement that emphasized the sacramental life of the church over the, in addition to the preaching life of the church, there was a movement that reshaped worship to become much more Catholic and symbolic, a sense of mystery in worship, an emphasis of the Catholic kinds of actions like crossing yourselves or incense or even candles. At the middle of the 19th century, almost no churches, either Anglican or Episcopal, had candles or had crosses. And there was a very low church bishop in Virginia, Bishop Meade, in the early 1800s, who walked into a church and he found crosses at the end of each pew, not crucifixes, just crosses. And he took his stick and whacked them because it was all about the word. It was all about the cognitive understanding of faith versus the symbolic. And so the Oxford Cambridge movements and the resulting change in practices, I think, were a kind of compensation that occurred, a balancing out of what had become rather dry and cerebral, and I think the Methodism really was an earlier form of that with the Wesleys in the late 18th century, which had a much more affective or feeling movement of the heart, the conversion of the heart, and not just the kind of dry intellect. So that, in a nutshell, does that answer your question? So there was a lot of, and this emerged into the mid 20th century when it came to the question of the prayer book revision, and the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, which was our worship book, went back and brought in some Catholic features. At the same time, it used more contemporary language. The idea of women's ordination, women as priests and bishops, that also became a source of conflict within the church. Does gender have anything to do with ordination to the priesthood? And it also challenged the cohesion of the worldwide Anglican communion, because there were some countries that were far more patriarchal and still do not allow women to be priests or deacons. In my lifetime, I've seen all of these changes, but they came at a cost. And then we had the question around sexuality and what about sexual orientation, and can gay and lesbian persons, transgender persons, become priests, be married, be bishops, and all of that. All of these had kind of deep theological questions on both sides, which emerged into practice and canons. And so we are where we are now, probably, I would say, a more theologically progressive church than perhaps some others. The Methodist Church, being a worldwide church, is struggling now with that whole issue of marriage between same gender persons. Other questions? The good thing about the Episcopal Church and our family of Anglicanism is that we're willing to struggle with it. Do we lose people? Yes, we lose people in parishes who cannot tolerate the tension, but at the same time, um, our our core value says that we stay in the conversation, we keep coming to the table, and we don't leave the table simply because we disagree, and we work it out and struggle with it. And that goes back to Queen Elizabeth I and the compromise between Catholicism and Protestantism to find a middle way, the Via Media. Anything in your, yes?
Yeah, I have a question. Just coming from a Baptist background, in the Baptist church, it's this idea of sort of church autonomy is a big thing. And yes. Each church is sort of an entity in itself. And so I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around how things work in terms of where Christ St. Luke's is in the relationship between it and the other parishes that are under the same bishop, and just sort of that whole structure. Could you maybe explain a little bit more about kind of, and particularly Christ St. Luke's in general, as opposed to the whole system, but sort of how it goes up and yes. how much of the decision making is the church, and how the individual parish, and how much of it, just all that, just
absolutely.
That would be fine.
That was actually going to be my session last time, so I'm glad you asked that. Let's start with the parish. So Christ in St. Luke's is at the ordained priest at Christ in St. Luke's is leader is the rector. The rector means ruler. I think it's a little bit of an unfortunate term. I think pastor is a gentler term. Pastor being the pastor, the shepherd, the caregiver, but there's rector, and according to the canons, which are the rules of the church, the rector is in charge of the sacred life of the church. So under the rector has to do with the faith formation of the flock and the worship of the church. Those things that shape faith and worship and values. So preparation of confirmation is under the rector, preparation of baptism, and by extension, other people who work in the church report to the rector and are extensions of that ministry. Now there is there is also a parish council called the Vestry, and the reason it used to meet in a section of the church called the Vestry. And so hence the name. It's called the parish council in other countries. So the vestry is chaired by the rector or by someone the rector designates. Normally it's somewhere between 6 and 12 persons, and the vestry is in charge, in essence, with the tangible or secular life of the church, in terms of money, raising money for the church, the buildings and the grounds, or the business life of the church. But the rector sits on the vestry, does not have a vote, but chairs the vestry, and that's what's different from other nonprofits where you might have a chair of the nonprofit board, and then the director is on the board but ex officio. So I have in the last few years designated the senior warden. There are 2 wardens who function a little bit as the chair and co-chair. the senior warden, and the junior warden. Sometimes they're called the rector's warden and the people's warden. They are, in a sense, executives of the vestry and work closely with the rector and comprise an executive committee along with the treasurer and the secretary or register of the vestry. Vestry meets once a month and also functions as a council of advice and consent to the rector. So that's on the parish level. Because we are an Episcopal church, which means to be ruled by a bishop, as opposed to, for example, Presbyterian church, in a sense, the Methodist church is an Episcopal church in that it is ruled by a bishop. But if we are, our parish is part of a diocese of about 105 congregations of various sizes. The land is actually owned by the diocese, but it is held in trust by trustees, according to the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And the diocese is ruled or overseen by a bishop. And in the same way that we have a vestry, there are actually three other aspects on the diocesan level. There is a standing committee, which is a committee in our diocese of 3 clergy and 3 lay, who are a committee of advice and consent to the bishop. There is the executive board, which has representatives from each area of the diocese. And the executive board is charged with coming up with the budget and the investment in the financial life of the diocese. And then once a year, we have our Diocesan Council. In other dioceses, it's called Diocesan Convention. And that is comprised of all the clergy, all the ordained persons, and representatives from each parish. And the number of representatives are based on the size, the number of people listed, enrolled in the church. So the bishop is the chief pastor. And I, as a priest, I am a rector, priest. I'm not a member of Christ and St. Luke's. My family is, but I'm a member of the diocese, and ultimately I report to the bishop. So the parish cannot fire me. They can ask the bishop to remove me, but they cannot fire me. And the bishop, the idea of a bishop is that each clergy is a representative of or an extension of the bishop's ministry in the diocese. So in other words, the real pastor of all of our parishes is the bishop. But since she can't be in all the parishes, we are, in a sense, her representatives. And we have a bishop's chair in each parish, or a bishop's chair is called a cathedra, and the bishop's church is the cathedral, the official church of the bishop. So that's the diocesan level. Then there's a national church level. In our case, the national church has the presiding bishop, and the presiding bishop is called the presiding bishop because after the American Revolution, when we were no longer under England, we set up a bicameral system, just like the United States government. I think last time I said that many of the same people who set up our system of government in the United States set up the system of government in the Episcopal Church. So the presiding bishop is the one who presides over the upper house, which is the House of Bishops. All the bishops in the Episcopal Church have an upper house. The lower house is the House of Deputies, which is comprised of deputies or representatives from each diocese elected by each diocesan convention. And they are, so there's a certain number of priests and certain number of lay people, and both houses gather every 3 years in a convention of the Episcopal Church. The House of Bishops meets twice a year. So that, and of course, there are various committees and commissions in all of these levels. So that in a nutshell. So if you think about it, starts on the parish, diocese, and then national church. Does that help, or is that, I'm sorry, it's so dry. I wish I could make it more exciting.
Well, it's just the nature of the beast, but no, that
Exactly.
helps a lot. So
it's a lot of oversight. We give our diocese, because we are part of a diocese, we give money to support the diocese. Some parishes are assessed. We are given a recommendation. We give 10% to the diocese, and so that reaches out to a lot of ministries, and that the diocese gives 10 to 20% to the national church, and that does international ministries as well. Mm-hmm. So that's a piece of it. And here's what I was executive officer of the diocese until 2010. It was called canon to the ordinary, meaning the one who reports to the ordinary, or the one who ordains, not just the average guy. I did that too. So the thing that I really love about the Episcopal Church, and it even Episcopal parishes struggle with this, because parishes like to be autonomous, but there is a guarantor in that pastoral office of the bishop, a guarantor that there is care. To have the bishop speak to a clergy gathering and say, I have your back. Or if you feel vulnerable leading worship right now, because you have physical conditions that might make you vulnerable to COVID, I want you to know that I have your back, and I'll make sure that there's someone there to help you. Or if the parish council, the vestry, gets angry at you and want to fire you, or they don't like what you're preaching, or this, that, and the other, you've got a bishop who can help you negotiate that and work that out. And the bishop can speak on your behalf. The bishop can also speak on the laity's behalf to you, but in a way that you can learn and grow from that. So in the best sense of the word, it is also, the bishop is a guarantor of best practices as well. So there's always, to some degree, a love of autonomy in churches, and she doesn't breathe down our necks, but at the same time, she is a guarantor of the faith and of good practices and our Episcopal and our values in every church.
Reverend Canon Lewis, I have a question.
Sir.
I know you're canon to the ordinary, assistant to the bishop, but you just use
the
term, and you still use that in your title. But you said what was the exact, translating it out of church speak, you were executive officer of
the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Virginia. So I was in charge as canon to the ordinary. Now the term they've clarified it, made it canon to the bishop. but my job was to oversee the ordination process. I also was the person who brought in a team if there was a misconduct by a priest. If there was, I also oversaw safe churches, so the training of people to make sure that there is no abusive behavior. I focused on leadership development, support of vestries and clergy. I negotiated conflict management, and was a kind of principal advisor to the bishop. So it was a lot of things. I did a lot of traveling, and the thing that I learned was the power is in the relationship. You have to put your money, you have to build relational capital. And so I spent a lot of time working with parish leaders and with clergy to build that relationship of trust, so that we could be more supportive to them.
Well, you represented the bishop too, because the bishop couldn't be everywhere in some of these issues. Is that correct?
I did. In 2003, when the Diocese of New Hampshire elected the first openly gay and partnered priest in their diocese as bishop, and that had to be confirmed by the national church. There was a great uproar among some of our churches, and at that time both bishops were away, so I went from church to church and did listening sessions and tried to help people work through their reactivity. Some parishes did just fine. Christ and St. Luke's did just fine in all of that, and became a bit of a refuge. Other churches disagreed with it vehemently and had to work through it. And one church in the diocese left the Episcopal Church.
Was it fun?
It was an interesting time. I knew Gene Robinson, and actually he had the same position in the Diocese of New Hampshire that I had in the Diocese of Southern Virginia, and happily, I think Jackson is going to interview him for a parish podcast soon, if I'm not mistaken.
How long were you canon to the ordinary?
8 years.
Okay. Some of those things sound like fun.
Well, here's the thing.
And you're good at it, Win, but it still is kind of fun, in quotes.
Well, I found it very interesting and varied. I think the power is in the relationship, as I said, and it taught me a lot about how people see things, how they struggle with things, how they struggle with truth, how they grieve, and what a bishop's ministry can do and can't do. But there was a lot of reactivity. Whenever you do something new, we are hardwired to rebel against it. And it also taught me about what the difference between good leadership that is unifying and divisive leadership that usually has to do more with the ego of the leader rather than the faithfulness of the pastor.
Sounds like you could do some real commentary on the body politic on that very point.
I learned a lot because it is a political system. Anytime you get human beings together who are governed in one form or another, you're talking about something political. And you know, we try to navigate faithfully within a political system. It was not always pretty, because it was human.
Could you comment on the relationship between the national church and the worldwide Anglican Communion?
Thank you. That the way to think about worldwide Anglican Communion, which are comprised, you know, the Church of England had a huge influence worldwide because of England's reach out in the Commonwealth countries. And the residue of that is the worldwide Anglican Communion, which really developed fairly recently in the 19th century as a sense of family, that we, under the Archbishop of Canterbury, who does not have any kind of legal or canonical authority over the different churches, but we realize that we're stronger together. And so we want the bishops of all the Anglican churches, including the Episcopal Church in the United States, gather every 10 years at Lambeth Palace, the home of the place of the Archbishop of Canterbury, for the Lambeth Conference. And it's a way of being a worldwide family that navigates many different cultures, all races, all socioeconomic groups, and so it is a wonderful microcosm of our world that gathers together as people of faith from around the world. And the Archbishop of Canterbury convenes that, even though he does not have authority per se over all of those churches. And they have different, within their own national boundaries, they have different forms of polity. For example, as I said, in the Episcopal Church, because of the timing, because we were under the Bishop of London until after the American Revolution, we reflect the American system, a representative system, which in one sense weakens. We don't have a monarchical bishop, but there are some countries who do, and it's very hard for them to understand why it takes so long for decisions to happen in the Episcopal Church versus other Anglican churches.
Why don't we have any archbishops?
Well, we do. We just call them presiding bishop, but it is an archbishop. The word archbishop means head bishop, from the Greek arche. And so the presiding bishop is a more American way of talking about it. You know, and again, the Episcopal Church was established at a time when the idea, we were very reactive to anything that looked monarchical. So hence presiding bishop. And so many, you know, including Thomas Jefferson, were Anglicans. Other questions that you might have? These are good questions. And if something doesn't make sense, let me know. And it doesn't matter how, it doesn't have to be too off the charts. John, were you saying something?
Yes, I know this is not serious theological, but I noticed you wear different types of apparel on different Sundays, and different people wear different.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with any of that.
Yes, I'm going to show you that. What I would like to see, and we can do it one of two ways. Next Sunday, we will not meet because I will be marrying Jackson and Emily. But I would like to see what next Monday evening might look like. And we could have you come either in the church, if you're comfortable. We would do a screening temperature check, that kind of thing, socially distanced, to talk, to do a little bit of a walkthrough, but it would also allow me to show you the vestments and those kinds of things. And again, it would just be us, so we would have all that space and also have distance. It would allow me to talk a little bit about the parts of the church, and also help me run through and describe and show you what you will be doing for the confirmation. I don't want anyone to feel in any way, shape, or form uncomfortable coming. So we will also, if anyone would prefer to stay home, we will use the cameras to do a live stream. And you're not going to be there, Emily. Yeah. So we'll record it live stream. We'll do a live stream and record it. So I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. And if so, just go ahead and contact me separately. And if you'd like to stay home or you'd prefer not to come, and if no one wants to come, that's fine. We'll live stream it for you and we'll do it there. We can use the cameras. And on the chat, Emily just put my email address. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. We can do a both and. But if sometimes I'm a little bit better being in the place and seeing it, do come wearing a mask, and we'll have someone meet you at the door and do the temperature, ask the usual questions, but it will be plenty of space between us. And I can introduce you to a little bit of the accoutrements of the church at that time. So that would be from about 7 p.m. To 8:30 on a Monday evening.
Thanks.
And Emily, you just sent a text to everyone about is that about the sign-up sheet, the information form?
Yeah, I just need to know how many people are going to be attending in your party, because we need to know how to limit everyone else's sign up for November 15th. So right. I just need to know.
And numbers. You can just email Emily.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So we have about 10 minutes left. Are there other questions?
This is sort of a pastoral question, but I really appreciated your comments about dealing with reactivity. This next week, we go into national elections and all of the hubbub that's going to go with name calling and conspiracies and whatnot. And I'm just wondering your counsel of how to stay supportive of these various views while at the same time having particular hope or more of the Elizabethan way.
It's a very complicated thing, Dave, because most conflict is built on different perceptions. And our perceptions are shaped by information, and information is conflicting. So I think that as people of faith, we need to be in prayer. We need to be listeners and questioners. There are two values that I want to emphasize in our baptismal covenant, which is our covenant of relationship. And that is to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself. And so that means that the people we disagree with and disagree with us, even though they are not, even though they're disagreeing in a very unpleasant manner, we need to seek and serve Christ in them. Somewhere in their hearts, there is a great fear. And that doesn't mean we, put up with abuse, but we recognize the fear. And number one. The second one is to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. And so that has to do with justice and peace. And justice in peace, justice leads to peace, to shalom. Justice has to do with a society in which all are cherished equally and respected equally and have equal protection under the law. That term is actually in one of our prayers in the Book of Common Prayer. And so as Episcopalians, we believe that we have to carry that seeking and serving Christ in all persons, loving your neighbors yourself, but also if there is injustice, we are there to reach out and support the vulnerable and to strive to build a society that is just for all. And so I think the idea of tit for tat leads us into an unending battle. To be peacemakers, however, we have to make sure that we are protective of those who are most vulnerable, and that there are enough resources and respect and love and care so that the dignity of every human being is respected. So that's a little bit of a high level piece. I think that affects our vote. I think it affects how we respond. I think it affects our attempts to try to understand and explore the truth. And it also means taking a look at and being honest about the shadows side of our culture. Every culture has a shadow side, and to address that and own that, even though there may be aspects of it that are shameful, and make sure that we learn from that, not to duplicate it.
Thank you.
And that is hard for some people to do. And so I think that I liked this book that a friend of mine gave to me about asking questions. I think that's and that we're always looking for reconciliation. The Archbishop of Canterbury has a whole course on reconciliation. And he starts out by talking about the aspect of being curious and asking questions. And I think that's a way to go, a way to start. So that's a big answer maybe but I think also, I've said this before, I really believe that I'm at my worst when I'm reactive. And I need to put a space of prayer between what comes in and what goes out. That there is, if I'm ready to react, if I feel that anger coming up in me, wanting to say something, that's when I need to turn it over in prayer and reflection. And then what I say will hopefully have much more meaning than not. And I'm not always successful at that. That's why I think I've said before, every once in a while, my wife will say to me, "And you do what for a living?" So, so I have to be very self-effacing at times, it's.
When you probably heard this, the job of a minister's wife is to keep him humble.
That's what Desmond Tutu said, I said, and they said, the interviewer said, "Archbishop Tutu, you're so loved by and idealized by everyone. How do you live with yourself?" And he says, "I go home and my wife makes me take out the garbage." So, that's wisdom. That's wisdom. The worst thing that can happen is to be, I think the term is puffed up, inflated. Well, we are at a closing, and so we'll aim for next Monday. Is that going to be problematic for anyone besides Emily and Jackson that time?
Jackson
Okay,
can go.
that's.
I just have class.
What's that?
I said Jackson can go. I just have class.
Okay, I understand. And how has it been for the two of you? What questions do you have or comments? And you'll have to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
Basically, all of our questions have been answered already. Basically, the hierarchy and how much say does the Church of England have over the Episcopal Church, stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad. Would you all send me your contact information?
For sure.
Yeah, because I really would love to, grab a coffee with you or chat and, sometime when you've got a moment.
Right.
Thank you.
I just had one more question. Is the walkthrough only for the confirmation people, or can we walk through with you guys?
Come with me. No, you're welcome. Anyone's welcome. Absolutely.
Thank you.
No, more than welcome. And it gives you I think there's some things that we can do, but to come into the building itself is going to be helpful. And I think, whether you're confirmed or not, it's kind of nice to know what that entails.
Right.
Yeah, but I'll also do the liturgical fashion show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we can understand the symbolism of those things, because one of the things that I love about the Episcopal Church is we engage all the senses. It's not all just the head. It is the head, but it's the heart, it's the sense of beauty, it's a sense of wonder. And I'll go back to that original quote that I used the first session from a book called What is Anglicanism?, where he wrote that when Anglicanism is at its best, and that means that movement that includes the Episcopal Church, it's music, it's poetry, it's liturgy, meaning it's worship, and it's life, can create a world of wonder in which it is very easy to fall in love with God. And so that's the piece of the world of wonder. It's hard to get a sense of it right now with all of our restrictions, but it's still there. It's still there. And we can, one of the things that I'm going to talk about in the future is I'll have some special classes on the Anglican divines, the poetry and the artistry of Anglicanism. So I'm going to offer some episodic things. For example, we normally have a session with Kevin Kwan, our music director, on the music and worship. So I'm, as we go along, I'm going to probably offer those kinds of things as well. But likewise, it sometimes works better in the church, and we'll do a live stream for something like that. So this won't be the ending. We'll have some more discussions, but this brings us up to the verge of confirmation. Yes, sir, Dwight.
Time on Monday?
Pardon?
What time on Monday?
7. I figured we need to do it late enough so there's no traffic and people are finished with work and have something to eat. So it will be 7 to 8:30, and I'll send out a notice about it. Well, I hope you all have a beautiful evening. Blessings, and I will see you next Monday at 7 p.m. at church. Come in through the tower on the corner of Olney and Stockley Gardens. You know, we have our usual check-in desk, and we'll have someone there.
Sounds good.
Have a good night.